A lone dissident has entered the heart of the European Union to expose what he calls a systemic medical scandal. Billboard Chris stands in Brussels, and the establishment is listening. The setting is the European Parliament, a chamber typically reserved for bureaucratic debates and endless regulation. But today, the atmosphere is charged with a different kind of energy. Under the cool, clinical glow of the European flag, gold stars against a midnight blue void, stands a man who has made his name on the street corners of the world. Billboard Chris, known for his silent protests and confrontational advocacy, has been invited by members of the AfD to speak directly to the power brokers of the continent. He is not here to negotiate, he is here to deliver an indictment. The room is tense, the air is thick. The parliamentarians present, a mix of engaged listeners and stone-faced skeptics, are about to hear a dismantling of modern gender ideology that few in this building have ever dared to whisper, let alone broadcast to the world. Chris does not mince words. He launches an immediate offensive against the pharmaceutical interventions currently being prescribed to confused adolescents. He focuses his sights on puberty-blocking agents, drugs he describes not as medicine, but as tools of chemical sterilization. He paints a harrowing picture of the biological reality. Teenage girls, physically healthy young women, being plunged into artificial menopause. He details the side effects that the mainstream narrative often omits: the potential for osteoporosis, the sexual dysfunction, the permanent alteration of human development. This is not a policy disagreement. This is a description of irreversible systemic failure. He argues that these procedures are robbing children of their future fertility and trapping them in a cycle of lifelong medical dependency. The gravity of his accusation hangs in the air, characterizing the current standard of care as a grave ethical violation against the most vulnerable members of society. But how has this practice continued unchecked? Chris points to a sophisticated ideological shield, a branding exercise he refers to as the rainbow alphabet. He argues that this movement has effectively conflated normal childhood development with a medical condition. He describes a system where the natural confusion of youth and even the distinct personality traits of effeminate boys or tomboyish girls are immediately pathologized. Dissent is silenced through social pressure. Skeptics are labeled as bigots. He suggests that the activists behind this push have created a zero-tolerance environment for questioning the narrative. By wrapping these irreversible procedures in the language of civil rights, he claims they have insulated themselves from necessary medical scrutiny. It is a psychological operation, one that convinces parents that affirming these permanent changes is the only way to save their children. A premise Chris rejects as false and manipulative. Then the speech takes a dark turn into history. Chris refuses to let the audience believe this is a strictly modern phenomenon. He traces the roots of these medical experiments back to the Weimar Republic, specifically to the work of Magnus Hirschfeld in 1920s Berlin. He draws a direct line from those early experimental surgeries to the clinics operating today. He invokes the specter of the past, reminding the European Parliament that the pathologizing of healthy bodies has precursors in the darkest chapters of the 20th century. He references historical figures who collaborated with authoritarian regimes, suggesting that the origins of this ideology are far more sinister than the current slogans would suggest. It is a chilling comparison. By linking the modern movement to these historical experiments, he frames the current crisis not as progress, but as a repetition of past medical hubris, where ideology once again supersedes the Hippocratic Oath. This speech does not exist in a vacuum. It arrives at a moment when the tectonic plates of European medicine are shifting. Chris stands in Brussels, just as nations like Sweden, Finland, and the United Kingdom are reversing course. The Cass Review, a landmark investigation into these practices, has already exposed the weakness of the evidence supporting the affirmation model. Europe is waking up. The Dutch protocol is crumbling under scrutiny. Chris utilizes this momentum, positioning his testimony not as a fringe opinion, but as the vanguard of a returning sanity. He highlights the irony that while the activists push forward, the highest medical authorities in the very nations that pioneered these treatments are now hitting the brakes. The Parliament is forced to confront the reality that they may be legislating based on outdated, disproven dogmas, while the rest of the medical world moves toward caution and protection. The impact of this address was instantaneous. Within 48 hours, the footage was viewed over 15 million times. The digital public square erupted. Parents, medical professionals, and concerned citizens flooded the platforms with support. One commentator, a registered nurse, validated Chris's description of the physical toll, listing the harrowing reality of pelvic atrophy and osteoporosis in young patients. Another user, a woman in her 60s, expressed horror at the idea of inducing menopause in children, calling it a form of medical negligence. The sentiment is overwhelming. It is a collective cry of outrage, a sense that a line has been crossed. The video has become a rallying point, a piece of evidence that the silent majority is finding its voice. They view this speech not just as commentary, but as a necessary intervention to stop what they perceive as a crime against the next generation. As Billboard Chris steps away from the podium, the silence in the room is deafening. He has laid the evidence bare. He has connected the past to the present. He has challenged the most powerful institutions in Europe to look in the mirror. The battle for the integrity of childhood is no longer being fought in the shadows. It has reached the floor of the Parliament. The question now remains, will the leaders of the European Union heed this warning? Or will they continue down a path that history may one day judge with severe harshness? The movement to protect children has found its champion in Brussels. And if the reaction to this speech is any indication, the reckoning has only just begun. The world is watching, and the clock is ticking on the age of unchecked ideology.